my speech in three. Ladies and gentlemen, in our current status quo, people around the world forgets the problem that is very important, and that is the environmental issues. Many people deem it as not urgent and should not be focused on, but we beg to differ. The issues of environmental, for example, climate change, waste, and pollutions, is much more bigger than we realize. Climate change ruins farmers' harvests, waste destroy rivers that is used by communities, and pollutions impact our very lungs directly, especially in big cities. And we think that it is that important figures such as the religious leaders should be focused more on environmental issues, and that is why we as the proposition team fully support this motion of religious leaders should prioritize addressing environmental issues over moral policing. Before we're moving on to our arguments, I would first like to set definitions and keywords and set definition limitations on how far we're going to take this. So first, definitions. We think that under our side propositions, we think that this motion is talking about religious leaders should focus more on talking about issues of the environmental over moral policing, like talking about doing good deeds, being nice to your neighbor, and then moving on to definitions of keywords. What is religious leaders? We think that religious leaders are someone who's being the leader of a certain religion, certain big religion. So we're talking about Christianity, for example. We're talking about Islam. We're talking about the Jewish, or we're talking about the monks in the temple. So, for example, one of the example we have is the Pope. So we're talking about it's a big religion that can have a huge influence on talking about environmental issues. And then what are environmental issues that we're talking about? So we're talking about issues such as the climate change, such as waste, and such as pollutions. So those are the three main things that we're going to talk about if we're talking about environmental issues. And then moral policing. What does it mean to religious leaders to focus more on over moral policing? So we think that under our side proposition, moral policing is talking about doing good deeds in your area or being nice to your neighborhood. And we think that addressing environmental issues is also part of moral good deeds. So we think that it is actually a very important thing to talk about. And then moving on to our arguments, we have four arguments on why we support these motions. So first, it is an effective way to handle environmental issues. And secondly, the taking care of environmental is part of good morals. And then third, it's an act of justice. And lastly, the problem of environmental issues is bigger and more urgent. As the first speaker, I will talk about two of our arguments, and my second speaker will continue on with the third and fourth. So first, it is an effective way to handle environmental issues. What do we mean by effective? We mean that it by doing religious leaders talking about prioritizing or addressing environmental issues is way more effective because it talks about on a larger scale. We're not talking about an activist that talks on their media social, for example. We should stop climate change. We should stop the use of oil. And most people not going to listen because they don't have any good standard on why standing on why they support those. And then religious leaders, they actually have a large influence because it is actually part of the code, that is the religion, that we should take care of our environmental issues. We should take care more on our surroundings. It's not just about talking about doing good deeds. We're not just talking about being a good person as a general, but we should address more about environmental issues to handle. So it is very important that religious leaders should prioritize addressing environmental issues. So we think about the Pope, not the Pope on the Pope talking about environmental issues. And then moving on to our second argument, or taking care of environment is part of good morals. So what, as I said before, over moral policing. It's talking about good deeds, but taking care of environment is also part of good deeds. We're not just saying that we should prioritize addressing environmental issues more, because moral policing is not, we don't think it's okay. We deem it as useless, but we're not saying that. We think that moral policing is a good thing. We think that overall moral, of course, is a good thing, but we should prioritize the environmental issues first, because what's the point if there's laws around the country in the what's the good thing if there's a good moral around the country if buildings around us is destroyed, and it's also connected. Morals is to the environment is also connected, because if we have good morals, of course we're going to have good environmental around us. And then they're going to say it is not religious. It is not the religious leader's role. It is not the Pope's role to talk about environmental issues, and there are activists to take care of that. But we're not. But we don't agree with that role. We think that leaders, especially of a large community leader, should focus everything about problem of our the bigger problem of our planet, and that is the environmental issues. We don't think it is the Pope should only talk about being a friendly, being a friendly person to all your neighbors. We don't think it's only focused on that, but we think that talking about environmental issues is also a very important thing. And now they're also going to say that it's not important. It's not talking about environmental issues. It's not important. It's not part of the being a religious leader. But we think that it is a part of being a such leader to talk about environmental issues. And in conclusions, we're not saying that policing about morals is not important. We're saying that addressing environmental issues is also the biggest important factors of what religious leaders should talk about. Is what they should focus on, not just about moral policing. And for all the reasons above, we as the proposition team support this motion, and we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
The Prime Minister has spent 7 minutes and 36 seconds. To engage the ideas from the Prime Minister, I would like to invite the leader of oppositions. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The main ideas or the reasons from the Prime Ministers is only because of the environmental issues assumed as the bigger global problem that should be prioritized by everyone, especially for those who are involved in a very large scales of community, and they think that the religious leaders is the main actors that can make effective strategy in order we can reach the goal preventing the environmental damage regarding the climate change, for example, waste management pollutions. But before moving on to my arguments about why do we still believe that the status quo is already enough, I'm going to give some points of rebuttals for the Prime Minister. Number one, in terms of background, they fail to explain to us about the failure of status quo. If their objectives in these motions is in fighting the involvement of the religious leaders to give preaching on that behaviors of society or other people toward environmental issues, then the questions will be why the status quo is not enough. We also believe that actually the governments, especially sorry, the religious leaders, is already take part as the one who also reminding those society or those people toward environmental issues from their preaching. But we don't think there's a problem toward this kind of the involvement in the status quo, and they fail to prove how the status quo is not enough. And second of all, they also assume that this proposal is much more effective, but they fail to explain us how their proposal is much more effective compared to the status quo. Now, let's take a look how actually the religious leaders, like Pope, for example, always put this kind of the agenda as one of the agenda in their religious teaching. But once again, they don't prioritize addressing this as their own as the main agenda. Because of what? Because they trying to think about the role as the religious leader, which is only focusing on the moral pleasure rather than something that is not on their studies in gentlemen. This is the problem. If you just forcing them prioritize not on the bill, just not on the studies, this is not meeting your expression about the activity of environmental issues you are proposing in your proposal, ladies and gentlemen. This is about in this about the like that. And first of all, the arguments about the um, yeah, right? No? Okay, now come to the arguments about some points of arguments. So, now come to the arguments. Number one, when they try to criticize about the main actors of the motion is about the religious leader, and they think that they also assume that the environmental climate change, waste, and pollution is also part of the religious teaching, but they never explain how it links to the religious teaching directly. We we already actually mentioned that in status quo, the religious leaders already put their role as one who also care to the environment, but we don't see any urgency also force them to try addressing environmental issues as their main agenda because this is not the expertise. So if you are expecting more because of the large scale scope that can be covered by the religious leader, I don't think this has become the women's solution for the environmental issues. Compared to the status quo, how the activists of environmental issues, for example, how the government has more responsibility on that. I believe that those actors are the one who are more what's called deserving to be forced prioritizing their programs and also their policies toward the environmental issues, not the religious leaders. And now, second of all, they also believe that even if they think that the religious leaders are not expertise on this kind of the problems, and they think because of they have a very big influence toward the society, and they also assume this is more effective to reach the awareness of the society toward environmental issues. We admit that we think that this is not significant to change the what's called the behaviors of the people, and they have to prove in the second speaker how their assumptions about the influential factors from the religious leaders can easily change the behaviors of the society in terms of environmental issues awareness, ladies and gentlemen. And now come to my arguments as the opposition. As the opposition, I'm going to prove to you on how prioritizing environmental issues is not the core identity of the religious leaders. And second of all, I'm going to talk about the social cohesion on how by forcing the religious leaders to prioritize addressing environmental issues not brings something better toward the environmental issues we are proposing in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. And my second speaker will talk to you on how if you allow them to prioritize addressing environmental issues, and we believe that harm situation, worsen situation will be happened because of what this kind of the is not something really what's called it's not something easy to be solved by someone who are not experts on this field, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll come to my first argument as the opposition. Number one, as I've mentioned to you, prioritizing environmental issues is not the core identity of the religious leaders. I tell you, first previously already mentioned that yeah, because they also there's also the consensus of environmental awareness in the religious teaching. Yes, we admit that, ladies and gentlemen. But the most important part is about the strategy or the methodology of the religious leaders when they try to influence their followers, ladies and gentlemen. It's about pleasing. They do preach and also they what's called they do teaching, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe that it's not enough just only through preaching and also teaching to change the environmental issues, sorry, environmental awareness of the society. We need beyond that, ladies and gentlemen, an action, real action, ladies and gentlemen. If you're expecting the religious leader to also follow their preaching the reaction. We don't think this is feasible. Why? Because they don't have any kinds of burgeoning position. They don't have any kinds of what's called power and also capacity to do the real action in terms of environmental issues. What once you force them to prioritize addressing the environmental issues, meaning that they also have to be responsible, not only stop in preaching but followed up by the actions in terms of environmental awareness. This is what we cannot achieve if we force them to be the one who is the main actor in environmental issues, ladies and gentlemen. And we still believe that the collaboration between the religious leaders, like have been started in status quo with the government, with the activists, is already enough, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that it's much better. If you please the followers, the people. We still in status quo is already done with this entertainment properly. The progressives there. So what is better? What is the most important part is the involvement of the government, the involvement of the activists. Activists should not only preaching, activists should do more than preaching. And the government should also support by the policy making, but by the supportive policy toward the environmental awareness, which is more important compared to only led them to prioritize addressing environmental issues as the religious leaders. And second arguments as the first opposition, action, ladies and gentlemen. What it's from the religious leaders, it's not something minor beyond their expertise, which is environmental issues. As all we know that talking about environmental issues is not only about teaching, it's not only about reaching the awareness, it also needs about an expertise. It also needs this approach. It also needs about knowledgeable approach, ladies and gentlemen. If you're on rely on the preaching, I think this is not the best solution to be forced, to be given to solve this problem. Because of that, we are proud to oppose. Thank you. So to continue the arguments of the government, I would like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Ersa, the screen is yours.
All right, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The world is facing a serious environmental crisis. Climate change and pollution are not just scientific problems, they are the moral ones. Religious leaders have an important role not only to guide people in faith, but also to protect life and God's creation. Few rebuttals in this debate. First, the opposition side of the House, they said that protecting environmental issue is not the core identity of religious teaching. Religious leaders should be more focused on moral value rather than environmental issue, and then how it links directly to moral. Here's the thing: many religions teach that people are meant to be caretakers of the earth. It's a core belief. So fighting to protect the environment is a direct way for a religious leader to live out their faith. It's a moral duty to take care for God's creation. And that the foundation of this belief is that the earth is a divine creation and humanity has been given the responsibility to care for it. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a sacred trust. When religious leaders prioritize environmental issues, they are calling their followers back to this foundational responsibility. In Christian and Judaism, the book of Genesis describes God creating the world and then placing humanity in the Garden of Eden. Work it and take care of it. This is the concept of stewardship. It means we are not the owners of the earth, but rather it's temporary. We are the caretakers of it. Our job is to manage and protect it for the future generation and also for our God. And then in Islam, the Quran teaches that humans have been appointed as Khalifah on earth. So the role comes with a divine responsibility to maintain the balance of nature. The faith also has strong prohibitions against waste and destruction, stating that corruption on land and sea is a result of human action. Therefore, protecting the environment is an act of obedience to God. For many religious leaders, the fight against climate change and pollution is a direct expression of their faith. It is a way to serve not just their community, but to honor the creation that sustains all life. So by prioritizing the environment, they are upholding a moral duty that is as old as their scriptures. And then I will come to my argument. First, this is an act of justice. The poorest people in the world are the ones who suffer most from the effects of pollution and climate change. By fighting for a healthy environment, religious leaders are directly helping the most vulnerable, which is a key part of their missions. Environmental issues uh, usually harm the poor. The reality of climate change is that pollution and climate change they are not affects equally. The communities that contribute the least to climate change are the first and hardest hit by its consequences. Communities often live in the most dangerous and fragile areas. They are low-lying coastal regions threatened by rising sea levels, online prone to floods and landslide, or in arid zones susceptible to drought. They don't have resources to build protections or move when the disaster strikes. The world's poor are also more likely to live near polluting factories, landfills, and industrial zones. This means they have less access to clean air, clean water, and healthy soil. Their health is directly affected by the pollution they didn't create. Dependence on the livelihood of millions of people depend directly on a stable environment, from farmers who rely on predictable seasons to fishermen who depend on a healthy ocean. When climate change disrupts these natural systems, it directly destroys their ability to earn a living, pushing them further into poverty. And then for religious leaders, a core part of their mission is to stand with and protect the poor. When they see that environmental destruction is the root cause of so much suffering, they realize that fighting for a healthy planet is the most direct way to serve those in need. This means that advocating for clean energy, pushing for sustainable agriculture, or protesting against pollution is not just government the government duty, but it is an act of moral clarity and compassion. It's an extension of their duty to feed the hungry and care for the sick. By leading the charge on environmental issues, religious leaders are fulfilling their mission to protect human life and dignity. And then, second, the problem of environmental issues is bigger and more urgent. All right, now think of it like a building. Would you worry about a small crack in the wall if the whole building was on fire? Climate change and pollution are the fire for our planet. They threaten everyone's survival, so they are a bigger, more urgent problem than any personal behavior. And then this is because this is a global threat to all life. Moral issues, while are important to some, often deal with private behavior or specific community standards. They affect individuals or groups, but they don't threaten the entire community. Environmental problems, on the other hand, are universal and indiscriminate. And then climate change affects everyone. It doesn't matter what your faith is or what you believe. Rising sea level, extreme heat waves, and then severe flood and droughts impact people from every country and every community. Pollution harms every living thing. The air we breathe and the water we drink are shared resources. Pollution is one country can affect the air quality and climate of others. This means pollution is a shared problem that directly threatens human health and the natural world on a massive scale. And then the time is running out. Unlike personal moral conduct, which can change over time, the damage to our environment can be permanent and irreversible. We cannot undo the extinction of a species, bring back a melted glacier, or reverse the acidification of our oceans. This sense of finality and urgency requires leaders to act now. Ignoring this crisis to focus on less pressing social issues is like a captain arguing with a passenger about their seating arrangement while the ship is rapidly taking on water. A true leader must direct all attention and resources to the most critical, time-sensitive problem. A religious leader's greatest calling is to protect their flock and future generations. The most serious threat to the flock today is not a behavior issue, but a crisis that jeopardizes their very hope. So, in our side of the house, we believe that the religious leader should take part in protecting the environmental issues. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Second speaker has spent 6 minutes and 45 seconds. Okay. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The main issues brought by the second speaker of the government is all about telling us why the environmental issue is really important. We don't say no on that. We still okay. We still also believe so that actually everyone should care or aware toward the environmental issues because it leads into our life in the in on Earth, ladies and gentlemen. But it's not all about that. But it's about the approach, the strategy, how to solve the problem, ladies and gentlemen. And your proposal as the government branch, you believe that what we can do is by forcing the religious leaders in prioritizing addressing the environmental issues toward this kind of the um, problems, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that status quo is totally enough to preserve us to solve the problems. But what is the failure of the proposition is all about how they prove that the status quo is not enough. If you're expecting, like the second speaker stated to you, about the social awareness, the people awareness from the followers of certain religions, for example, through the teaching or the preaching from the religious leaders to build the awareness, because this is all about their life as well. This is all about their existence on earth at this gentlemen. But the problem is that why the status quo is not enough. We still also believe that, like what Ersa has stated, that actually in religious teaching, like Muslim or Islam, for example, also teaches about the balance between the nature and also the people's life in on earth at this instant. We also believe so, and but because of the status quo is already enough to also highlight the environmental issues, and we believe the status quo is enough. But the question is that why then you only want to prioritize addressing environmental issues compared or over to moral policy, ladies and gentlemen? As the opposition, we still believe that the main core or the main duties of the religious leaders is focusing on the moral policy beyond us only limited to the environmental issues as their was a prioritized agenda in this kind of the teaching, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we don't want in this debate. And second of all, they also talks about how the influential factors that have been what's called that have been stated by the prime minister and also the second speaker about this religious leader can give a very big influence to people, and they think and they also assume this is effective to raise the awareness of the people, ladies and gentlemen. We think this is also okay, but the thing is that we do not only stop on the awareness of the people. We need to do more than that, beyond that, ladies and gentlemen. Because collaboration between the governments, the activists, the people, the religious leaders in the status quo is already enough. It's already progressive to show how everyone also has the responsibility. If Ersa stated about the responsibility of everyone, we also believe so. That's why the collaboration should be there. But we don't think what's called eliminating the main core identity of the religious leader by just prioritizing the addressing environmental issues as their main job in this kind of the problem to this environment. Because of as we also still questioning about the expertise of the religious leaders. We are not okay if we just let them to prioritize something that our predecessor in the very beginning. They mentioned that actually, even if the environmental issue is part of the moral policy, we don't want only a very small certain of behaviors becoming the main address in their teaching and also preaching. This is what we don't want. We want the balance, as I stated, the balance of moral behavior. And moral behaviors is so complex, not only all about the environmental issues. So never only prioritizing only one certain of issues, which is environmental issues, which is not on their field or on their expertise, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we don't want in this debate. We want them to be balanced in any types of moral policing, including how we behave to other people, how we behave to God, and how we take prey, for example, and how we also care and our toward the environment, ladies and gentlemen, but not only prioritizing addressing environmental issues as their main agenda in this kind of emotion. And we also believe that um, their assumption about the expectation from the society is also becoming problematic in their case, ladies and gentlemen. They think that people will easily also change because of the preaching and also teaching from the religious leaders. I don't think as simple as that. As I told to you previously, as also believe that the most important part is the actions after understanding, after gaining the awareness, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes people are knowledgeable enough. Sometimes people understand how to, for example, cook, but if they don't want to cook, this is the problem. Sometimes people also understand how to clean their room, but because of their awareness, also because of their real action is not there, so there's no model on that, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe that the religious is not a good model to teach an action on that kind of the behaviors toward environmental awareness. And we believe that there's someone else who is more aware on this kind of the issues, like an activist. Why? Because they have enough time, they have capacity, they have the power to do the actions of beyond the what's called just simply addressing the issues without any kind of the real action. And we believe that the is something more complex compared to the religious leader. They can do campaigns. They can do also teaching and also gaining the awareness. They can also continue and follow up those what's called teaching by action. And this is what the religious leaders cannot do, because of what is not their core identity as the leaders of a group of people, because their core identity is teaching and preaching over the moral policy, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we are thinking as the opposition. Now come to my second argument as the opposition, or as the deputy leader of the opposition. What harms situation will be accessed if we force the leader of religious leaders to prioritize addressing environmental issues. Number one, they will be biased in designing the strategy on the environmental issues. Per se, if you are expecting them to do more, for example, maybe the will say, hello, they can also do an action beyond the teaching and preaching. They will do so. But the problem is, if they don't have the best way, or if they don't understand the best way, how the best approach, how to preserve the environment, for example, how to deal with the climate change issue, waste management, for example, they don't have those knowledge, then they will do something not relevant and not what's called meet the expectations of the objectives they are want to gaining in this debate and this entertainment. At the end of the day, they will do something wrong. For example, when we talk about waste management, for example, if they don't have those knowledge, how can they do an action and also gain the awareness of the society? This is something not what's called nonsense expectation coming from the proposition of this implement. And because of that, we think that the harm situation will be there if we force them to prioritize in environmental issues. And the last of all, we also believe that the most important part is about the changing behaviors of the society. And we believe that they will only rely on or believe on the religious leaders because they are the most influential people. Then compared to the activists, they will also think that, hello, activist statement and also the government policies are not stronger, also effective compared to the religious leader preaching. And this is something really what's called problematic if we let this happen. At the end of the day, awareness they are expecting will be not relevant, and also, of course, it also influences how they behaviors to treat, or also to treat the environment in the future. This is what we don't want happening in this kind of the debate. Because of that, we proud to oppose. Thank you. This is kita sisa waktu 1 menit untuk Zoom ini. Saya tutup dulu. Kita buka link yang baru ya. I will resend you the link. Okay.